Hello everyone, my name's Tomatoanus, also known as erectile dysfunction. This is a single segment any percent speedrun of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and I'm gonna explain how a top runner, PeteSwanson, beats the game in an hour and 3 minutes. Pete not only recorded the run for this video, but helped with the script to make sure it's all as accurate as possible and I don't embarrass myself any more than I already have. This run was chosen to be covered by my patrons, who suggest and vote to decide the topic of every other video. So if you have an issue with this run being covered instead of, I don't know, Ape Escape, take it up with them. Or if you want to join them and help decide future videos yourself, more on that later in this video. Anyway, let's get straight into some speed tech. This run opens with a grueling skip called Windmill Skip, or Windmills for short, or Windmilge for short. Pete himself has run a bunch of games and says that this is easily one of the hardest skips he's ever learned. There's a tall invisible wall extending around the Prologue area. You can climb the windmill's rotating blades to get on top of the wall, then drop down to the end of the Prologue area, skipping a tutorial fight and saving about 2.5 minutes. Climbing a rotating ladder is about as tricky as it sounds though. Only one of the windmill blades has collision you can jump onto, so after normalizing his position into a corner, lining up his camera, and inching back and left so that Gustav's head is just visible, he waits for the correct blade to pass the archway down here, then runs and jumps onto the blade. He has to keep running and jumping into the blade to stay aloft, with him ideally hopping fully onto the blade, able to kinda ride it to the top. But it's never that simple, and usually includes him reacting in the moment to how Gustav interacts with the windmill's collision, oftentimes necessitating dropping down a blade and trying to ride that one up the rotation into the invisible wall. Okay, that should be enough precursory windmill info. Let's get into the run.
Whoa, Minnesota guy, you guys built a rocket?
Yeah, I was getting Minnesota Dad caught up on the Twilight series and New Moon inspired us to go to the moon, don't you know? Wanna come with?
Yeah, sure. It has been a while since we've done a mini arc.
3, 2, 1, go.
By the way, I'm gonna talk about this video's sponsor the entire ride, Patrick Adair Designs.
Oh, they're that jewelry brand that makes rings, bracelets, and more from unconventional metals, right?
Yeah, like meteorite.
Fitting.
Their pieces are designed by trained artisans, with customers able to customize their rings with things like personalized engravings. They also provide free sizing kits to make sure your ring fits just right before they craft it. My rose gold crimson mosaic glowstone ring is a perfect fit.
Hey, what happened to your finger, Chicago guy?
I hurt it while wiping.
I hate when that happens.
Each ring comes with a lifetime warranty too, so it's no surprise they have over 100,000 happy customers.
Did I hear they're having a limited time site-wide buy one get one free sale going on?
Yeah, and you can mix and match the offer across any designs or products on the site. Use the link patrickadairdesigns.com/tomatoanus to shop the sale and use code TOMATO at checkout. Wow, short flight. Oh, so that's why we stopped going to the moon.
That's a lot of ghosts.
After skipping the 2 opening cutscenes, Pete begins the run by grabbing the flower for Sophie, otherwise Mael won't let you leave the balcony. He then books it to the windmills, filled with the ardor of Don Quixote. Again, he'll normalize his position after hopping up onto the base of the windmill, look at a specific spot, and inch until Gustav's pixels are showing, then waits until the good blade rotates by in the windmill's cycle. As soon as the blade covers the archway, he sprints and jumps to land on its collision. Oh, and he fell off. Again, this skip is ridiculously hard. The collision is really precise, and the timing of the jump onto the blade is super important, with it being all too easy to just slide off like he did there. This skip was found by one Cardinal about 4 months after release, with him noticing he was getting a landed state after jumping to a blade, then tassing his way all the way to the top. It was tough going when little was understood about the windmill. Like, when Pete first tried learning it, it took him 6 hours to be able to land on the blade correctly, but now Pete's good and knowledgeable enough to typically get it within 5 tries. Alright, ready for his rematch, Pete normalizes his position, angles his camera, and waits for the blade you can jump on to pass the archway. He runs and jumps and tries to get on top of the blade to ride it a bit, but was relatively low to the blade's top and fell a few blades down, but was able to recover and get to the top of the windmill where he hops and mantles up the invisible wall. He leaps down from the wall to make a totally normal entrance and spaces his jump up here so he toe taps the railing, letting him turn rather than continue soaring the direction he jumped. He has a few cutscenes to skip here, with the thrust of the plot being established. Every year, a big lady dubbed the Paintress updates her countdown clock, with everyone who's that age getting Thanos'd. This yearly event is called the Gommage. We, as Gustave, are part of this year's expedition, an annual attempted excursion to the Paintress to stop her. Before we can embark, leaving the island of Lumière behind, we have to talk to both Gustave's apprentices and his adoptive little sister Maëlle, with the apprentices being faster to talk to first since Maëlle is brooding at the end of a long dock. Worth bringing up early that Pete plays with both controller and mouse and keyboard. There are specific things he does with each device, like using mouse and keyboard for all his movement, but when mashing text, he's usually using both A on his controller and F on the keyboard at the same time. There are a lot of dialogue choices in this game. When Pete needs to pick the second option in a dialogue choice list, like when performing Maëlle fight skip by saying no, he uses his mouse to click the option. He then has to go talk to Gustave's other sister, Emma, who pretty much runs the island of Lumière and is going to be of zero consequence for the rest of the story. When Pete intends to select the first/top option in dialogue, just before the option appears, he'll mash only A, making the game think he's using controller. Then, just as the option appears, he mashes F and A to get a fast first option. Pete skips a few cutscenes to properly begin Act 1. This is the general outline for the game, Acts 1 through 3, with each act having some locations you're expected to enter to progress the story. There are a lot of skips in this run, and we won't be seeing many of these locations, but let's keep them around in our list for now to not spoil any of the fun. The first combat starts after a cutscene trigger up here. Skipping cutscenes is simple, just pause and hold B, but a lot goes into making sure your timing is correct to skip the cutscenes as quickly as possible. For a lot of triggers, it's super feel-based. You gotta just build up the muscle memory, but for this one he has a visual cue, using a rocky texture to make skipping the cutscene more of a timed thing rather than a reaction. For this first fight, he wants to shoot the Lancelier's body and weak spot, then skip the rest of his turn since it's faster to kill with a parry than an attack, but Pete missed the weak spot shot, so he ended up attacking to make up for the lost damage. It's worth calling out that shooting is something Pete does with mouse and keyboard over controller, just like movement. Faster to crank 90s with mouse than analog stick. Pete has a little bit of a run ahead of himself here, taking a direct line through Spring Meadows. You'll notice he has the reticle turned on. Similar to the stray run I covered, runners like to turn this on to help with aligning certain setups or making sure he has as tight of a line as possible. You'll also notice Pete jumps a lot. It might look like he's jumping over nothing, but he's typically dodging tricky collision in the terrain like pebbles or bodies. Seriously, a pebble can snag you up and stop your movement. Best be jumping. In this story, Gustave's expedition isn't going too well. They made landfall and were absolutely obliterated by a bunch of monsters and an old dude who kinda looks like he's wearing expeditionary clothing. Gustave's one of the few survivors, with him being reunited with another expeditioner, Lune, in the upcoming cutscene and combat. The cutscene will start just as Pete is partly through the rock cluster up here, again serving as a cue for when he'll be able to skip the cutscene. This fight's against a Portier, which he shoots in the weak point and body with Gustave, attacks with Gustave, and ice lances with Lune to kill. If you skip Gustave's turn to try and save a second, you need ice lance to crit to kill. Since he hasn't leveled at all, his crit chance is really low, and it's not worth going for the 1 second time save. This fight gave the Dodger Picto, which grants small bonuses to your speed and crit rate, and has the passive ability where you gain 1 AP on a perfect dodge. AP is what you use in combat to shoot and use skills like Ice Lance. Each Picto has 2 stat bonuses, like Dodger's speed and crit rate, along with a passive ability which is called a Lumina. Once you've had a Picto equipped for 4 battles, its Lumina becomes an ability you can equip without having the Picto equipped. Each Lumina costs a number of points to equip, so choose wisely. And wisely is how this run is routed. No detours unless absolutely necessary, like grabbing the critical burn Picto here. Pete's gonna skip a rope climb inside by jumping on a big round thingy, then leaping across to some collision, staying wide left while leaping to avoid bouncing off the wall, then running and jumping to the top. That climb saved 2 seconds, and since it's not an out-of-bounds skip, it's allowed in glitchless runs too.
Here we are.
There's a ledge you typically have to mantle up just ahead here, but with a carefully timed jump, you can do a ledge grab skip and save a couple seconds. There's a lot of these through the run. Some are more precise than others, but this one wasn't too bad. Here we have our first fight against a trio of enemies. 2 will get to attack before it's Pete's turn, and he'll parry both to kill. It takes 5 shots to kill the remaining Dualliste, so Pete's hoping Gustave gets attacked at least once. Since you need 5 AP for 5 shots, you gain 1 AP at turn start, and you gain 1 AP per parry. This run both attacked Lune though, so he skips Gustave's turn to machine gun with her. After a bit more running and then climbing some handholds put up by Expedition 69, nice, there's a cutscene where Lune and Gustave find their first journal from a previous expedition, learning from those who came before. Pete's going to do something called a cutscene menu as he enters this cutscene. There's a brief window after you press the menu button that you maintain control of movement, and if you enter a cutscene trigger during this brief window, you can menu while the screen fades into the cutscene. Most of the menuing in the run is done this way. Hitting a trigger during the brief control of movement can be pretty tough since you only walk a short distance in that span, but if you jump, you travel much farther, making it easier to hit the trigger. Here he removes and re-adds Gustave to the party and equips Crit Burn and Dodger on Gustave and Lune respectively. Pete will be grabbing another Picto very soon that he'll put on Gustave, which will make Gustave and Lune's speed the exact same. Turn order is determined by speed, but in event of a tie, the first person in party order goes first, which is Lune since he swapped Gustave out and in. To get to that next Picto, Pete saves 3 seconds by cutting a corner with a jump to a rock up here, meleeing to stop his movement in place so he doesn't roll off, and leaping up to grab Dead Energy 2. Dead Energy 2 has speed and crit rate bonuses and the Lumina of plus 3 AP when you kill something, but also has an unlisted 10% damage boost. At the flag, he levels up both characters, maxing out might for the attack power. This will be what he does most of the time, though luck and agility will have their moments. He also learns the skill Powerful on Gustave before leaving the flag. He then initiates another cutscene menu by pressing the menu button while holding forward and jumping right after pressing the menu button, so he soars into the cutscene trigger for the first boss fight as the menu pulls up. While cutscene menuing here, he equips Dead Energy 2 on Gustave, giving him and Lune the same speed, but again, she's first in the party, so she'll go before him. The fight opens with an attack on the whole party, netting them 2 extra AP each by parrying.
Ready to evade.
Pete shoots once to clear the shield, then casts Immolate with Lune to get Évêque burning, and uses Powerful with Gustave to amplify the party's damage by 25%. Since Évêque's burning, Gustave's critical burn Picto is active, giving a 25% increased crit rate for 45% total, with him getting 1 on this parry. You can tell something's a crit if the damage number is orange, with Gustave's number being on the left despite him being on the right of Lune. For Lune's next turn, Pete re-ups the burn with another Immolate, and he'll use Lumière Assault as Gustave to build up his overcharge meter. Overcharge costs 4 AP and does more damage based on what the overcharge meter's at. Unfortunately, after Évêque summons Bob and Kevin, it ended up choosing to attack just Lune, leaving the AP Ravenous Gustave 2 points short.
Get ready.
After using all Lune's AP to machine gun Évêque, Pete will spend Lune's turn to use an energy tint on Gustave to gain 3 AP. This is enough to overcharge and hopefully land that 45% chance crit to finish the fight, skipping Évêque and Co's turns and saving 30 seconds to a minute, but unfortunately Gustave just can't crit it up, leaving the party with 0 AP and resulting in Évêque having a ton of shields. Not great. Pete's plan of attack now is to kill Bob and Kevin with shots from Gustave so that he can benefit from Dead Energy 2, gaining a ton of AP to clear Évêque's shields, but first he parries Bob and Kevin's attacks to get them in one-shot kill range. When Pete used Overcharge, it stunned Évêque, skipping its next turn, so once the order circles back to Lune, Pete uses her singular AP to chip one of the shields, then chooses to attack Évêque, chipping another shield and leaving Bob and Kevin for Gustave. Gustave starts his turn with 3 AP, using 2 of them to eliminate the Gentle minions, bringing him to 7 AP total, which he uses all of to machine gun Évêque, followed by attacking to lower its health so it'll die to the next parry. Or rather, lower its health low enough with the next parry so that it begins the fight-ending cinematic where Lune launches Gustave in the air with a rock, he human bullets Évêque through the chest, and Lune aura farms by swooping into frame from behind Évêque. Évêque can drop a recode as a reward, an item that lets you respec your build, which Pete needs one for later, but it's a bit uncommon with one not getting dropped here, so he'll have to grab one later on. So fun fact, if a skip to Évêque was ever found, runners would have to solve a soft lock. Without Évêque, you can't go to camp in the overworld, which is required to enter the next area, so no Évêque skip for you. Yet. Speaking of camp, Pete will hit the trigger for camp access mid-roll after dropping off the object in the environment up here with him mashing G to enter camp right away, interrupting the landing roll as early as possible since the roll is slower than normal movement. This is the only camp of the run where the top option at the bonfire progresses the game, so he runs up to and interacts with it using controller, but only uses F on keyboard to select the top option when it's highlighted. Now that he's been to camp, Flying Waters is accessible. We're headed there in the story because after fighting Évêque, they found an unsigned note from someone saying they took Maël to Flying Waters. Upon entering, he'll do another cutscene menu to unequip Lumière Assault from Gustave's skills. He's going to be learning Marking Shot soon, and wants the spot on the left where Lumière Assault was to be open for quickly assigning it. The skill menu is 2 pages and open to the left page by default, with paging to the right being an encumbrance. After skipping the cutscene, he's going to take a slight detour left to grab some chroma. Chroma's this game's currency, though he's not grabbing it because he needs money. He's grabbing it to trigger the game to autosave, which also puts autosave on cooldown. The game autosaves both periodically and after item pickups. Putting autosave on cooldown delays the next one until after he runs past some bomb enemies up ahead. Another thing about autosaves is that they overwrite the previous autosave, except for every dozenth save or so. That autosave will stay in the memory and not get overwritten by new saves. Pete wants a save to be made in a specific spot for access later, so it'd be nice to somehow force that save into staying and not have it be overwritten. That's why he loads this autosave right when it happens. This load looks weird. It's because he's doing something called a debug load. Just ignore it for now. For some reason, if you load a save, the first autosave the game makes after loading will stay in the memory, and wouldn't you know, the next autosave that'll be made after loading the game in this spot is the one Pete needs to stay saved for later access. The reason the autosave stays in memory is that when you do this, the game actually creates a duplicate of the new autosave. It makes 2 of them. The game only overwrites the topmost save, so the duplicate underneath goes unscathed. Pete has a visual cue for a cutscene skip here of when Gustave's almost touching the plants, with the cutscene here being Gustave and Lune going through an ornate door, leading them to the manor. Notice the autosave that's made upon loading in. This is the save that's being duped and stored in memory. Maël's being chilling in one of the rooms upstairs, where Pete's headed, and he'll do a cutscene menu as he enters the room. Despite Maël joining the party after the cutscene, you actually hit the trigger for her to join just before the cutscene starts. This lets Pete prepare her build by switching Critical Burn and Dead Energy 2 to her, then unequipping the Spark skill for the same reason he unequipped Lumière Assault. Swapping those Pictos to Maël is important because she's going to be the big damage, praying for crits character in our party. After skipping the cutscene and gaining control of Maël, he waits for the autosave icon to nearly disappear, then loads the autosave from the entrance of the manor, the one that was duped and stored. He runs to the manor door as Gustave and interacts to leave, and as the screen fades to black, he loads the autosave that was just made when he gained control as Maël. This loads him in at the other side of the door, but as the save with Maël, so he pretty much skipped running back through the manor. This is typically called a save warp by the game's speedrun community, and it's the same exact thing as load warping in Fallout 4, a way to fast travel to locations of old saves. This first save warp happened to also skip the introduction of the Curator, a super important NPC that, now that we have Maël, is spawned in at camp. Skipping his introduction removes some dialogue into fight, saving about a minute. Here Pete grabs a recoat since Évêque didn't drop one, an unfortunate 16-second detour. Now that Mael's in the party, our main objective is to leave Flying Waters and head to the next area. Typically you have to fight Goblu to leave, but Pete will skip that boss fight and save about 2 minutes with Goblu Skip. That'll be in just a moment. First he has to get to the starting line for the skip, with him doing another ledge grab skip right up here.
Something. So they have intelligence.
At the flag, he levels everyone up, maxing might for Gustave and Mael and putting into both might and agility for Lune. 3 agility is enough to make sure she has the speed to go first in the next big fight, but it's also enough to tie her over for the rest of the run. For skills, he gets marking shot for Gustave, swift stride for Mael, which fills the void left by Spark, and rock slide for Lune. That last one won't be used for a bit, but taking it now saves a menu later. Pete grabs the staggering attack Picto here for its speed, which will become a noticeable through line with many Pictos. So Goblu Skip. This is one that's not too hard to learn, but really difficult to do fast because it's a lot of precise platforming, maneuvering above the area all the way to the exit. I'm going to play this sequence twice, once using slow-mo to point things out and give you the full picture, then again at full speed so you can marvel at just how fast Pete is able to do this. The hardest jump of Goblu Skip is the first, where he leaps from the first finger-like coral to another, then to a tree-like coral. He has a specific camera angle for it and holds forward during the jump, changing to holding forward right just before landing while spamming jump to hopefully hopscotch to the tree-like coral. Very hard jump, but not too punishing since you can just try it again right away. On the tree coral, sorry for not knowing what these are called, he spams some jumps to climb up and drops off a small ledge, melee attacking to stop his movement in place so he doesn't fall off the coral entirely. He does a bigger leap to more collision, again meleeing, this time to stop him from rolling, then runs off this ledge to a lower one where he jumps to precisely land on a rock where he melees again to not fall off. After getting high enough on this rock, he leaps across to a taller one and leaps to the top, which is tough since it's easy to get caught on here. He has a small stretch of patchy terrain that's not too bad to get through, just a lot of jumping, but this brings him to the really scary part, where if you fall in any of these large gaps, you have to load a save and start all the way back at the flag. He holds up and left to jump across a corner here, avoiding a slow run up a ledge, and jumps up some of the ridges on this rock/coral, don't know which, lost track, and has one last tricky jump here to get on top of the tall rock. After a little bit more rock hopping, he has a big leap down to a brain coral that's pretty easy to short. If that happens, you land on the wrong side of the invisible wall here and have to load a save. He again melees to make sure he doesn't roll off before he can jump and mantle up the invisible wall, jumping off to have more forward momentum as he falls down in the direction of the exit. Alright, let's go back and see that all again at full speed. In the words of Monoco,
wow.
Pete menus just before interacting with the portal to equip the staggering attack Picto for extra speed on Gustave, with the portal triggering the story event of meeting the curator at the camp for the first time. He's our vendor for weapon and resource upgrades. Pete will upgrade Mael's weapon to level 3. It's all he can do with his current resources, and it should be enough for the next big fight, the one for which we leveled Lune's agility to 3. He's going to do a debug load though to speed this up a bit. He did one of these earlier, but it was too much to go into while explaining the rules of autosaving. In short, a debug load is done by pressing Alt and V while you're either in a menu, loading, or saving, and it automatically loads the top autosave, the most recent one. This eliminates a bit of menuing and enables some neat things, like here when he upgrades Mael's weapon, he'll trigger a debug load, then tab to Mael with E, click her weapon, and hold F to upgrade the weapon to level 3. This loads the autosave that was made when he loaded into camp, but the upgrade carries over, eliminating the running between the curator and where Pete started. Pete actually messed this up a little bit here, accidentally clicking on Gustav's weapon instead of Mael's, so after the game loads back in from him pressing Alt and V, he attempts this all again. When he loads in, the game will autosave, with him immediately pressing Alt and V to do another debug load to load that brand new autosave, since again, you can debug load while the game is saving. Remember that one of the things about autosaves is that when you load a save, the first autosave the game makes after loading will stay in the memory. The game autosaves after he leaves camp and is back in the overworld. He wants to hold on to this save because it's next to a portal and great for save warping. Again, save warping is essentially fast traveling to locations in old saves. So typically in the story, right now you'd go through the ancient sanctuary to the Gestral village. There you find the next party member, CL, and get the password to access the next fight that I've been alluding to. Pete's gonna do password skip though, bypassing the bouncer in Esquie's nest to skip the two areas and CL entirely, going straight to the Esquie's nest boss fight. CL won't be in the party for the entire run other than cutscenes and those dialogue pop-ins. Password skip starts by jumping up the rocks of the wall surrounding this entry area. This takes Pete straight out of bounds.
That mountain is not just a backdrop. You can walk all the way to the top of that mountain.
The trigger for the cutscene before this next fight extends way below the map, deep into the abyss. Pete's on his way to a spot out of bounds where he'll leap under the map and navigate to hit that trigger. Like the abyss in Dark Souls, it's dark as shit down there, so he bumps up his gamma and turns down his contrast in advance. So there are 7 ledges down below that runners used to jump down to and climb up, but by running off the ledge in a specific spot on the right, then holding right and meleeing, he lands on a lip that he can leap straight to the 6th ledge from. Even with raised gamma, it's still hard to see, but he's hopping up from ledge 6 to 7. He jumps on some nearby terrain and climbs his way up to hit the trigger and start the Francois fight. This cutscene trigger being down here is another thing found by one Cardinal, the guy who found Windmill Skip. Francois opens with an attack on Gustav, which Pete actually dodges instead of parrying. He needs neither the damage nor the AP, and dodging saves at least a second over parrying. He chips the shields and uses immolation with Lune, getting Francois to burn. He uses powerful with Gustav so the whole party has 25% damage amp, then uses Swift Stride as Mael, putting her into Virtuo stance since she attacked an enemy who's burning. In Virtuo stance, Mael deals plus 200% damage, which will go away after her next turn. Pete skips Lune's turn to get to Gustav, using his 2 AP on Marking Shot. Marked enemies take 50% extra damage on the next hit, with Mael's per se skill dealing increased damage to marked enemies on top of the base 50% marked damage. Per se critted here with a 45% chance, dealing more than enough damage to finish off Francois. Had it not crit similar to Gustav's overcharge in Évêque, the fight would be 20 to 30 seconds longer. Francois gives a Picto with some speed, but he was necessary to fight to gain access to Esquie, this game's boat/airship, required to beat the game and paramount to several skips. Pete swaps his graphics back to normal and begins his run to Esquie. Along the way, we get a great example of CL still popping in for dialogue despite her absence.
Very different from Gestrals and Nevrons.
You think the Paintress created them too?
If not, who else?
Maybe they came from another world.
The more information we get, the more questions I have.
You okay, Sia?
Yeah.
Pete triggers the Esquie cutscene and takes a dip to rinse off the gamer goo from pulling off Windmill, Goblu, and password skips. He then waits for the autosave after the cutscene and loads the save from after Flying Waters that he force saved into memory. He'll save warp by loading the save that was just made after getting Esquie, then interacting with the portal to re-enter Flying Waters. This loads him in as the save with Esquie, but on the other side of the portal he just interacted with, quickly extracting him from Esquie's nest to the exit of Flying Waters, where he debug loads the autosave that was just made now on loading in. Remember that one of the things about autosaves is the first save made after loading a save gets duped into memory, and he needs the save that gets made here upon exiting Flying Waters back to the map to stay in memory for something later. He's now headed towards the Stonewave Cliffs, the end of Act 1, where we're going to search for Flory, a rock of Esquies that allows him to swim with people on his back, with which we can cross the ocean towards the Paintress. He grabs some chroma here for funding a future purchase, and before he can enter Stonewave Cliffs, he has to go to camp to progress the story, with him making camp right at the portal so he doesn't need to go through the Esquie mounting animation again after. I was gonna make a joke about Esquie mounting and Rule 34 here, but turns out no one's drawn any online yet. So instead, please enjoy this meme I made. Worth pointing out, a side effect of save warping is that Maëlle and Lune get duped in camp when you do one. I guess the ethics of cloning is another subject this game tackles. Pete's going to be getting everyone new weapons in the next area, which is why he didn't do any upgrading with the curator at camp. Pete has a huge cutscene menu to do at the start of Stonewave Cliffs. It's so big that the cutscene becomes skippable mid-menu, with Pete able to skip it with the menu open. He can then finish the menuing during the fade-in after the cutscene. First, he'll remove and re-add Lune to the party. She and Maëlle have the same speed, and Lune going after Maëlle means she can take immediate advantage of Maëlle giving the party AP when entering the defensive stance or parrying while in it. He then moves a Picto of Gustav's for faster menuing later and equips Augmented First Strike on Maëlle for crit rate and a ton of speed. That way she's speedy enough to go in the same group as Lune and Gustav and not have to sit through multiple attacks for a single turn in the next boss fight. He then finishes with swapping Lune's Rock Slide skill to the left side. Rock Slide does a bunch of damage when used with a fire, ice, and lightning stain. Most of Lune's skills generate a stain based on the type of element it is. Immolation generates a fire stain when used. Many of Lune's skills will consume generated stains to increase damage. Immolation will consume an ice stain if available to increase damage. So as mentioned earlier, Pete's going to get new weapons for everyone here in Stonewave Cliffs. The first of them is a detour, requiring a short run and climbing a rope. Pete stalls for a moment since autosave is on cooldown, then messes around with Pictos to force an autosave in this specific spot. Pete will shoot the 3 locks for the chest containing Gustav's weapon, Delaram, and just before he grabs it, he'll load that autosave he just made. Grabbing Delaram after selecting to load, but before the game actually does, causes him to warp back to the start of the detour, but with Delaram now in his inventory. Delaram will also be good on the next new party member. Up ahead on the right, he'll climb up some ledges, doing his best to climb the first 2 with just jumps, not holding forward much to avoid mantling. He mantles the final ledge intentionally, which is the fastest way up, and grabs the first strike Picto up here. This not only has a pretty solid speed value for this point in the game, and not only has the really powerful Lumina of playing first, but also has an unlisted 10% damage bonus like Dead Energy too. So in combat, you have 3 items you can use on your turn: a healing tint, an energy tint, and a revive tint. You initially have 1 of each, with them getting replenished after resting at a flag, but here he grabs an energy tint shard. He can use this to upgrade his energy tints so that he'll have 2 uses before needing to replenish, which can come in handy in Act 2. He does some more mountain goating here, avoiding mantle spots, and at the top he'll grab another Picto before continuing on his path through this area. This Picto is SOS Power, which has a pretty decent speed value, but also the Lumina of Powerful getting auto-applied when your health is below 50%. That'll come in handy later. For now, the focus is the speed it gives. So this run of Pete's is in the any % restricted category, which allows most speed tech aside from the stat glitch. That's the glitch that the unrestricted category is largely based around, which involves under and overflowing character stats to be able to nuke bosses quickly without any upgrades. Since he can't use the stat glitch to beef up his characters, the route in this video includes a couple extra stops to complete his builds. Pete's now arriving at the locked chest for Maëlle's weapon, Duanum, with him swapping to her now. The reason he swaps to her is she has the smallest feet, which makes it easiest to tell exactly where she's standing. Handy for climbing terrain and doing skips like this where he super carefully lands on tiny ledges, turning his camera and tapping right to stay away from the wall and not get bounced off. With just a couple jumps, he's then up and out of bounds. He'll hopscotch off a ledge up here, aiming to make sure he lands on a sloped face that kicks him into a nice stopper rock before leaping back in bounds. This skip circumvented a farm, a cave, and some ropes, saving about 45 seconds. He does a ledge grab skip here by staying far right and is now on his way to the third and final weapon he's grabbing, Coralim, which will be Lune's new weapon. Really, all three of these weapons he got are handy. They all start at level 7 and are pretty strong. At the top of this rope, he'll interact with some handholds through the wall, forcing him to the other side quickly. Along with the unlisted 10% bonuses on Dead Energy 2 and First Strike, this was patched out when the DLCs were added. This run is done on a down-patched version of the game, specifically patch 56323, downloadable through Steam's depots. All the out-of-bounds skips work on the current patch, but the aforementioned things and save warping were all patched out. He does a flag jump here, pressing interact and jump on the same frame to get more distance while still interacting with the flag, and takes a mighty dump on the party. Dumps all the party's stats into might. Pete now has to run down a foreboding tunnel to the Act 1 finale, the fight against Lampmaster. Because he didn't take the intended path to get here so far, Esquie doesn't sense something scary, so all must be clear. He does a sizable cutscene menu here headed into the boss fight, equipping SOS power on Gustave and First Strike on Lune, then cycling through everyone with RB and navigating on each page to quickly equip all their new weapons. Equipping these Pictos calibrates the party's speed, so not only will they all keep up with each other and not have Lampmaster go in between them, but it ensures their turn order will be Gustave, Maël, Lune. Lune goes first in the fight because of First Strike, with Pete using Immolation to both get Lampmaster burning and generate a fire stain. Lampmaster responds with 2 turns, the first attacking the whole party, the second attacking individual members and spreading the love a bit. The 2 big concerns in this fight are Lune's AP, she needs enough to cast Rock Slide twice, and having enough damage to kill. Since Lune's AP is pretty solid after these attacks, Pete opted to use Powerful on Gustave to aid on the damage side of things, rather than the alternative of energy tinting Lune. He uses Swift Stride as Maël to enter Virtuose stance since Lampmaster's burning, and then uses Lune's Ice Lance, generating an Ice Stain and a Light Stain, and slowing Lampmaster to make sure it goes just once here instead of twice. Though on its one turn, it still attacks twice, since Lampmaster is a dirty cheater. Gustave's turn is using Marking Shot to, well, mark Lampmaster, alley-ooping it to Maël for an increased damage per se that ended up critting for even more damage, followed by a critical Rock Slide from Lune which consumes the fire, ice, and light stains for even more damage. This wraps up Phase 1, with Lampmaster opening Phase 2 with 2 turns. Unfortunately, it chose to attack solely Gustave here. Unfortunate for 2 reasons. 1, Lune could really use the AP, and 2, Gustave's weapon deals light damage, which is weak against Lampmaster. Gustave might have 9 AP once it gets to his turn here shortly, but Lune's AP is the one that's actually important, so Pete will use an energy tint to grant Lune 3 AP. Maël's turn, he uses Offensive Switch to apply Defenseless to Lampmaster, increasing the damage it takes by 25%. As Lune, he Ice Lances again slowing Lampmaster to cut down its turns. Ice Lance consumes the Earth Stain for extra damage, and generates an Ice and Light Stain so that Lune has 1 Ice and 2 Light Stains total. Since Light Stains are wild cards, they fill in for the Fire and Lightning Stains required to greatly increase Rock Slide's damage. Pete next uses Marked Shot with Gustave, since per se does that extra damage against marked targets on top of the 50% increase from being marked. Notice the yellow bar under Lampmaster's health. That's the break bar, where using certain attacks to max out the bar or while the bar is full will break the enemy, stunning them for their next turn. Lune does just that with this Rock Slide, bringing it back to Gustave where he rinses and repeats last turn's start, Marked Shot into per se. He then will skip Lumière since she doesn't have anything she can kill with, but Gustav is bricked up and able to kill with overcharge, wrapping up the fight. Lampmaster ended up dropping a recoat, meaning that he didn't need to take that 16-second detour earlier to grab one, but as I've said before and will continue to say, Kest Levi. This transitions into a hybrid story fight / cutscene where Pete skips all his turns until the battle portion finishes and it becomes just a cutscene he can skip. A lot happens here narratively, but I'll just summarize spoiler free for now and leave it at it's revealed that the old dude who wrecked the expedition earlier is actually the director of Venom Let There Be Carnage. Yeah, people forget Andy Serkis directed that. Also, a bit of a rough poster. Related to movies, it's no secret I love them with how much I reference them on this channel, and if you want to hear me talk about them, I have a film podcast with my friend CJ, which is called The Film is Okie Dokie. Every other week we watch a movie to determine whether or not it's okie dokie, whatever that may mean. If you're interested, there's a link in the description, or you can find it wherever you find your podcasts. We've not watched the Venom movies yet though, not sure if we ever will, but figured I'd mention it in a video since I don't think I have yet. Back to the run, due to lore reasons and obligations to the plot, Gustav is swapped out of the party for a dude named Verso. Pete runs up to the curator to upgrade Verso's weapon from level 7 to 8 for the extra damage, does a debug load when opening the curator's menu to load the autosave made when entering camp, then clicks Delaram and holds F before the load starts to have the upgrade carry over to the load like earlier. After loading a little back in camp, saving on some running, Pete runs to the flag, jumps at it, and menus to get Verso set up, equipping the sword Delaram, then the first strike at Death's Door and augmented first strike Pictos, the last swap from Mael for SOS power. Verso's deal in combat is he has letter ranks that go up and down when you deal and take damage, with him dealing more damage at higher ranks. The Delaram weapon we grabbed as Gustav makes Verso start battle at rank B, but with 50% health. At the flag, he unlocks Rain of Fire for Mael, a burn ability that also swaps her to offensive stance. He then gets Perfect Recovery and Berserk Slash for Verso, making sure both are assigned in the left menu since, again, in combat you access the left menu by default. Last, he might maxes the party, save for Lumière, only bringing her up to 21 so that she has enough points available to ultimately get to 36 luck later. That'll pair with stats from some Pictos to give her a 100% crit rate. So one important plot development I neglected a moment ago is that we did find Flory, Esquie's rock, so Esquie can now swim with the party on his back. We can all now bask in the glory of Esquie's tiny, fluttering kicks.
Monolith, through the quarry to the north.
Pete's now headed to the Forgotten Battlefield, an area he could potentially skip but won't because of two vital things inside. The first is the ability to perform a gradient parry, a different type of counter for special enemy attacks. That's rewarded by completing the fight you're thrown into upon entering, where despite Verso having First Strike equipped, the Chalier goes first, the only encounter where First Strike is superseded in the entire run, not sure why. Pete would really like to kill this Chalier before its second turn, since that'd be when you do the first gradient parry, which is slow, and he gets lucky with it attacking Verso, who can kill it in one hit if the counterattack crits. Mechanic worth re-mentioning, after completing 4 fights with a Picto equipped, you unlock the Lumina for equipping independently of the Picto via Lumina points, with this having been the 4th battle with Dodger, Critical Burn, and Dead Energy 2 equipped. After the fight, Pete does a quick menu to remove and re-add Mael to the party. The next fight he'll preemptively initiate, and on this patch, preemptive turn order is determined by party order. So one of two things down in Forgotten Battlefield. The second vital reason why we're in Forgotten Battlefield is that there's a merchant here who sells the Inverted Affinity Picto. That has the Lumina where you're inverted for the first 3 turns of battle, dealing 50% increased damage while being unable to heal, and actually taking damage from it. Up ahead, he's going to do some platforming, jumping on a dead Nevron's shoulder to a quarry ledge, then doing a really tricky jump up onto another ledge before jumping over a barrier to get out of bounds. Each ledge is tiny, with him having to make adjustments on each one before the next jump, which is a great example of playing as Mael, so it's easier to tell exactly where you're standing. Speaking of feet in this game, my roommate exclusively played as Lumière. He insists that it's because he didn't like to listen to the other character's footsteps. Definitely not any other reason. So he goes out of bounds here since he can navigate from here to get to the Inverted Affinity Merchant sooner and save about 8 seconds, though he does have to be careful to not fall through the floor in certain parts. At the merchant, you'll see Pete preemptively move his mouse to the spot inverted affinity will be in the shop menu. This is one of the few times he'll use his mouse to menu other than dialogue options, with him using F to confirm the purchase right away. This leads straight into Dualliste Skip, a skip for this area's boss in the ensuing run to the exit, saving 2.5 minutes. The trigger for the fight is on a bridge, with the skip having you navigate there from out of bounds to avoid the trigger, then walking off the bridge in a specific spot to get flung to the end of Forgotten Battlefield. This is referred to as the launch, and it's probably the scariest part of the run, not counting RNG rolls out of your control. Gonna treat Dualliste Skip like Goblu Skip. Let's see it slowly, then at full speed. First he gets out on the building's ledge and jumps to a rocky ledge platform, going wide left to avoid the building's edge. With this jump, he's now out of bounds with an invisible wall to his immediate left. He lines up the next jump to a far narrower ledge, which is super easy to fall off and would mean reloading a save at the merchant. He inches forward to drop down to a ledge near this dark orange tree, then jumps up and right past the tree to land on some rocks that are behind an invisible wall. He chains a few jumps together, focusing on staying right to clear himself of obstacles and keep movement smooth, and after this slope he can hop up on some rocks and leap across to a giant pillar thing. There he uses a chroma elixir to force a safety autosave, since the jump to the bridge is super scary, with him again straying right with the jump, since if he lands too far left, he'll hit the cutscene trigger. Like I mentioned before, if you walk off the bridge in a specific spot, the game launches you, with you getting blasted off again forever. Like, look at this. Mael killed gravity. Turns out though that if you're aiming when you walk off the bridge and launch, you can stop the launch at any time by letting go of aim. The timing on when you have to let go of aim to properly launch to the exit is really tight though, like you have a window of 0.1 seconds to release aim. Release too soon, you won't launch far enough and you'll get stuck out of bounds on the wrong side of an invisible wall. Release too late, you'll launch too far and you'll get stuck out of bounds on the wrong side of an invisible wall. Pete moves to a specific spot on the bridge, aims, and holds right to walk off and trigger the launch, releasing aim at just the right moment to have the optimal height to land at the portal, with him turning his camera and holding forward to aim his fall. He can then report to the squad where he's dropping, setting himself up for a victory royale. Okay, let's go back and see this in full speed. Dualliste Skip is comparably difficult to Goblu Skip, but Goblu Skip is 12 minutes into the run with only one major RNG check before it, while Dualliste Skip is 30 minutes in with 3 major RNG checks beforehand, Évêque, Francois, and Lampmaster. A lot rides on Dualliste Skip going well when you're doing PB attempts. Finishing Forgotten Battlefield takes him straight to camp, where he menus as he approaches the bonfire. First he equips the freshly purchased inverted affinity on Verso in place of augmented first strike, then equips the first Lumina of the run, using 2 Lumina points to equip Dead Energy 2 onto Verso so he gets plus 3 AP on killing an enemy, and that unlisted 10% bonus damage. Sleeping at the fire leads to a story cutscene where Mael and Verso talk a little bit, growing closer and increasing their relationship level, though this is the only relationship level increase in the run. Speedrunners have a tendency to focus on fast rather than friends. Speaking of friends, in the story we're to go to Monoco Station and recruit the final party member, Monoco. Like I said though, fast, not friends, so Pete will skip Monoco entirely with Monoco Skip. Pete melees to initiate combat with these specific enemies here, that way the party gets a preemptive turn. Since he removed and re-added Mael to the party, Verso goes first with Pete using Perfect Recovery to heal himself, which actually deals damage due to the inverted affinity Picto, killing Verso. With then only 2 people in the party, he can immediately flee, rather than the drawn-out fleeing process of 3 party members. For some reason, if you enter this specific combat, then the collision spawns in for a shortcut bridge that you normally unlock a lot later. He'll be using the bridge to do Monoco Skip in a moment, but first he takes a quick detour to an encounter to make sure both the At Death's Door and First Strike Luminas get unlocked before some specific bosses later. Verso's able to clear all 3 enemies quickly with shots and a regular attack, since he benefits from At Death's Door's 50% damage bonus from only having 1 HP due to dying last fight. Headed back to the invisible shortcut bridge, there's an invisible wall partway across it that usually despawns when you activate the shortcut properly. Pete Pete will force an autosave by equipping a Picto when he's about as high up on the bridge as the mountain ridge, then press Alt and V while the save is being made to debug load that save. When he loads back in at the same spot, the bridge's collision will have deloaded and he'll drop onto the mountainside. It's important to land on the mountainside, not the ground, otherwise you're stuck. This begins Monoco Skip, where he takes a pretty specific line to navigate the collision in the mountain, headed towards the other side of Monoco Station with Esquie swimming through rock and snow.
Time for a swim.
This isn't too hard, but if you're reckless, you can slide off a ledge and get completely stuck. Overall, this skip saves about 1:50 seconds, and while it does mean that, like CL, Monoco won't be joining the party, at least the skip started with entering combat, and for that, let's hope he'd be proud. This leads straight into another skip, Old Lumiere Skip, which skips both Old Lumiere and Sirène. Well, it makes it so you only have to beat one Axon to finish the game rather than two, and Sirène is much slower than Visages. It's another out of bounds with Esquie, but it's much more involved, and also Verso's there too. The crux of this skip is mounting and dismounting Esquie in spots where you're normally not allowed to. There's a damaged building up ahead Pete's going to climb to start the skip, but he's first going to dick around with his Pictos to force the game to make an autosave. Since he just loaded a save during Monoco Skip, this Picto save will be written into memory. It's important that he's on Esquie when this save is made. Pete climbs the building by walking, slowly zigzagging up the destroyed side. This is actually pretty tricky. It's easy to spend a long time climbing. At the top, he'll do an Esquie debug load mount storage to quickly dismount Esquie in a spot he normally can't. First, he makes a Picto save like he did on the ground, then loads the save he made on the ground. I mentioned earlier you can debug load while loading, with him initiating one when the particles on screen stop moving. This loads the save he just made on the building where he wants to get off Esquie's wild ride. He mashes R to hop off Esquie in the brief window that ground save loads in, which essentially toggles whether you're on Esquie in the save you load, so he's now Verso on top of the building he just climbed. He needs Verso so he can cross this area here that Esquie can't, and when he's ready to remount Esquie, he forces an autosave with the Pictos, then loads the save from right after Flying Waters. He could just do another EDLMS since that toggles your Esquie state, but he really needs to write a new save into memory outside Flying Waters since the game can only store 20 autosaves and the old Flying Water save is getting a bit old. We need to make sure we still have a Flying Water save by the time we get to Act 3. Once it's made, the new Flying Water save will now be on top, meaning he can't do a debug load since he'll just load back into that save and not the Old Lumiere Skip save, so he has to do an Esquie mount transfer instead. Similar in concept to mounting Esquie across saves, you can mount Esquie while loading a save normally only if you open the Pictos menu after loading the save, which you can only do if the game is actively making a save. So he does a Pictos menu to force an autosave, loads the Old Lumiere Skip save, opens and closes the Pictos menu again, then mounts Esquie to transfer the mount to the skip save. On Esquie, he can swim across a ridge real quick and reach another building, where he'll position himself on the corner before again doing some Pictos menuing to force an autosave. This is because he needs to be Verso again, so he's doing another EDLMS by loading a save where Esquie is mounted and dismountable, pressing Alt and V to debug load, and dismounting Esquie during the load to toggle Esquie status in the skip save. Unfortunately, his positioning wasn't quite right as Esquie, he was too far left, so Verso falls to the ground. That's okay, he has a ton of saves, though Pete wasn't quite sure if it was his positioning that was off or if he accidentally held some movement, so he tries it again without changing anything only to fall again. Once he knows for sure his positioning was off, he'll go back to the save before that last Esquie stretch, loading in his Verso and making a Pictos save so he can do another EDLMS to get back on Esquie and attempt this stretch again. I know that this is a lot of Esquie transfer this, debug load that, save here and there. It's easy to get lost and confused, so just remember that all these loading shenanigans are to mount and dismount Esquie in places you're normally not able to, like in this out of bounds stretch he's in.
Time for a swim.
Now Verso on the balcony and not the ground, Pete's able to phase through the railing to drop onto what first appears to be a rocky cliff, only to realize that it's an invisible floor above the rocks. He rounds an invisible corner, then makes a Pictos save one more time. He needs uppies from Esquie one last time here. At the top of the rocks, he veers left to get Esquie to start swimming sooner, since swimming is fast, and naturally you can swim through all these rocks out of bounds, with him then going down the slip and slide cliff that was lubed with molasses to get back inbounds, plopping into the water after Old Lumiere. In short, the coral up here that's supposed to have collision has none because of this skip, meaning Pete can phase right through and head straight for Visage Island. In this story, there's a barrier surrounding the Monolith, that's where the Paintress vibe's out at, and you need to defeat the 2 Axons, now 1 Axon because of Old Lumiere Skip, to forge a weapon that can break the barrier. We'll get that weapon upon completing Visage Island. He has a bit of running here to the first cutscene trigger where he'll do the biggest cutscene menu so far, where, like the big one from Stonewave Cliffs, he skips the cutscene in the middle of it and finishes the menu after. He'll first and re-equip Inverted Affinity on Verso. Inverted Affinity grants HP, and because of rounding and keeping your percent HP the same, this raises his HP to 2. This is so he has health to lose so SOS power can proc. He'll then equip Augmented First Strike in place of Dead Energy 2 on Maëlle, which increases the damage of her first attack by 50%. Then comes equipping a lot of Lumina. Dead Energy 2 on both Maëlle and Lune, so Maëlle gets the unlisted 10% bonus back that she just lost, Critical Burn on both Lune and Verso, and Dodger on Verso. Really just putting everyone into the best position available in terms of AP and crit rate. So Visage Island has the main boss you can go fight at any time, but it also has 3 optional mini-bosses, the Joy, Anger, and Sadness masks. Pete's going to opt to do the Joy mask fight, which will give him more than enough XP to get Lune to level 17 to unlock Stormcaller, actually bringing her to level 18. As he enters the Joy Mask area, he cutscene menus again, first assigning Maëlle's Rain of Fire to the left side for quicker access, and clearing specific skills of Verso so future unlocks have places to go. He also removes and re-adds Verso and Lune from the party in that order. Since everyone now has First Strike, party order really matters, since like preemptive strikes, your party order determines the First Strike turn order on this patch. So this is a pretty efficient detour, with the optional Joy Mask fight not just giving a lot of XP, and not just being a pretty simple fight, and not just being able to be killed in 23 seconds, but being in the Joy Mask area means he's also able to grab the Confident Fighter Picto. Confident Fighter's Lumina is that you deal 30% bonus damage, but can't be healed. He'll equip it on Lune when jumping down towards the Joy Mask, with it reducing the number of shots and parries needed in the Visage boss fight, but more importantly helping max Lune's damage later on, and having a 20% crit rate stat. Maxing out her crit rate will be super important, more on that later. Pete carefully shoots the guy on the left's tiny weak point thrice, then Berserk slashes the middle enemy. Landing all the shots is super important because had his aim slipped and one missed, the dude would live and Pete would be short AP for Berserk Slash and he'd need to reload a save. When it comes to Maëlle's turn, he'll use her to shoot off the remaining shields and finish with another Berserk Slash from Verso. Fun fact, this fight was only included in the route recently. A fair portion of this script had to be rewritten because of it, with the route originally doing a detour to Hidden Arena for XP and Pictos. Doing Joy Mask over the Hidden Arena saves about 30 seconds, though the overall reroute is about 2 minutes faster, largely due to a new Paintress strategy. The Joy Mask fight spits you back out at the hub for this whole area, where he starts booking it in the direction of the Visage boss fight, his ancillary activities complete. The Joy Mask was the 4th fight with First Strike and SOS power equipped, so their Lumina are now unlocked, and the fight also dropped a new weapon for Lune, Chapelim, which will be her weapon for the rest of the run. It's level 11, a lot higher than Coralims, making it a big damage boost for Lune without needing to upgrade anything at the Curator. At the end of this run towards Visage, Pete will do a flag jump and use the recoat he detoured for / got from Lampmaster to respec Lune's skills. Now that she's level 18, she has 17 skill points for spending, one more than needed to get Stormcaller. Stormcaller makes it so that enemies take lightning damage after they finish their turn, and it can be used to skip Visage's second phase. He also learns Defiant Strike on Verso, an attack that lowers his own health.
Oh, God is in control.
Defiant Strike lowering Verso's own health will pair nicely with the SOS Power Lumina Pete will equip in the upcoming cutscene menu, where he'll also equip the First Strike Lumina on Maëlle and Lune, and Lune's new weapon, Chapelim. Worth reminding heading into the Visage fight that Verso is still at 2 HP with At Death's Door equipped, so he'll hit big, especially because Berserk Slash deals more damage the less health you have. Until the end of Act 2, damage per hit is capped at 9,999, so until you can remove the cap, it's important to not just focus on maxing out attacks, but maximizing the number of attacks. This beefy Verso having the multi-attack Berserk Slash comes in handy for that reason. Pete opens the Visage fight with offensive switch on Maëlle's first strike turn, which applies defenseless for 3 turns, then uses Defiant Strike to deal a lot of damage and self-damage Verso to proc SOS power. With Lune he casts Immolate, which has an interaction where when it's used on a marked enemy, you get increased burn stacks. When Visage attacks here, Pete dodges the last blow of the first attack sequence, then always counters the full second attack sequence. Like the reasoning from earlier, it's a matter of Pete being able to kill as quickly as possible in real time, not turn count, so he wants to avoid sitting through counterattacks if the damage from them will ultimately not be a deciding factor. Unfortunately, the second attack Visage did is the Doubt Mask attack, which is the slowest one it can choose. When it's his turn again, he first uses Rain of Fire on Maëlle, really building up a ton of burn that'll bring Visage near kill range on its next turn. With Verso, he again Berserk Slashes for a bunch of maxed hits, then he'll Stormcaller as Lune. Again, this makes it so that Visage will take lightning damage at the end of its turn. At the start of its turn, Visage takes burn damage, not enough to kill it, but Pete will parry its attack to deliver the killing blow, and after its turn ends and it's technically dead, Stormcaller still procs. For some reason, Stormcaller dealing damage after Visage has already taken lethal damage completely bypasses phase 2, cutting out half of this fight entirely. This is the only fight this works for. You can't do it at similar 2-phase fights like Paintress. So as mentioned earlier, a side effect of Old Lumiere Skip is you get the weapon to break the barrier after fighting only one Axon. Pete's not quite sure why this is, but he thinks it's likely a failsafe caused by missing a progression flag you normally get from killing a specific boss in Old Lumiere. Because of the failsafe, he can now go pop the bubble surrounding the Monolith, which is again the place where the Paintress lives. It's a pretty straightforward swim to the Monolith, just having to skip one cutscene along the way where Maëlle uses the barrier breaker to, break the barrier. Once he's actually at the Monolith, he'll interact with the flag at the start and do some leveling, dumping all of Maëlle and Verso's points into agility and Lune's into luck. This is the last big level up for the full team and penultimate level up in the entire run. The focus of it is largely to make sure that Maëlle and Verso keep up with speed, since their damage is already pretty solid, and to make Lune as crit happy as possible. Like I just talked about before Visage, before the damage cap is removed, your focus should really be on maximizing the number of maxed out attacks you do, and Lune has a skill she learned en route to Stormcaller called Lightning Dance. It does a minimum of 6 hits, but every hit procs a second time if it crits, so Pete's dumping of luck into Lune is to go for 12 hit dances. With this luck, crit rate from Pictos stats, and the critical burn Lumina, she'll have 100% crit rate for the upcoming bosses. At the flag, Pete also takes a couple new skills. The first skill he takes is Powerful for Verso. Powerful applies powerful, but he won't be using it. It's more a stepping stone to unlocking Leadership, which reduces Verso's rank and gives AP to his allies, super useful for alley-ooping. The next skill learned will be Last Chance on Maëlle. This instantly switches her to Virtuose stance for the 200% damage bonus, but it lowers her HP to 1. Sounds risky, but when you're a speedrunner who has every parry timing perfected, it's not an issue. In fact, it's great because not only does Maëlle have the SOS Power Picto equipped for an auto-powerful application when dropping below 50% HP, but Pete will also be adding the At Death's Door Lumina to both her and Lune for an additional 50% damage, and later he'll also get a Picto that gives an extra turn when dropping below 30% HP. The last skill that Pete will take at the flag is Wildfire for Lumière. It's another damage skill that actually deals self-damage if you fail its QuickTime event. It's important for that, for helping pile on burn stacks, and it's a good follow-up to Lightning Dance to prep Stains for a second Lightning Dance. So here at the Monolith, Pete has to run up to the Paintress to initialize the next fight. He'll do a cutscene menu when leaping into the fight, equipping the At Death's Door Lumina on Lumière and Maëlle as mentioned, removes the First Strike Lumina from Maëlle for fleeing a future fight, equips the Immaculate Picto on Lumière, and completely empties her first Picto slot. You get Immaculate when you beat Visage's second phase, which the game believes we did, and it increases damage by 30% until you take a hit. More fuel for her 12-hit Lightning Dance that'll have 100% crit rate. The emptying of her first Picto slot is to prep for a faster equip of the next one. Pete leaves the menu open during this fight though, so he can do something as soon as the fight's done. Runners refer to this as the Paintress fight, which is another story fight where, similar to before, Pete's going to try and skip his turn super efficiently to get through as quickly as possible. He taps B twice to back out to a part of the menu that allows battle inputs, with him using Perfect Recovery on Verso to heal himself, which deals damage and kills because of Verso's inverted affinity. He then uses Wildfire, intentionally failing to self-damage Lumière and take her out of the battle too, leaving just Maëlle in the fight to skip the turns, having one less to skip since he removed First Strike from her. The fight will be through pretty quickly. Then Pete will skip the cutscene and use the still open menu to move Verso to the back of the party and therefore Lumière to the middle for the next two boss fights. In the cutscene, the party was brought inside the Monolith, now beginning the longest running stretch, the Monolith Marathon. Not long after starting this trek, Pete will do a quick menu to equip Maëlle's Barrier Breaker, which is the first item listed in the inventory, so it's really fast to equip. Barrier Breaker's by far the strongest weapon Maëlle has right now. Its attack power in combination with Lumina like At Death's Door max Maëlle's damage with Rain of Fire. So the party's trying to make it to the top of the Monolith because that's where the heart of the Paintress is. If they can defeat her there, then she won't be able to update her countdown clock and people will stop getting Thanos'd. The Gommage will be no more. To get to the Paintress though, you have to run through a bunch of areas, each a vignette of the major locations we visited, or were supposed to visit but skipped. Each of these is filled with enemies to fight, but since combat in this game is triggered by running into or meleeing an enemy, it's all super easy to avoid. It does pain me in my heart a little seeing this giant stretch that took me a couple sessions be reduced to nearly 6 minutes of running, but that's the beauty of speedrunning. Keep in mind that through this whole run, Pete is intimately familiar with all the textures that have a tendency to reach up their grubby hands and grab your ankle, snagging you and losing time. He's constantly jumping to avoid these. The jumps aren't just for show. Now is probably a good time though to actually talk a little bit about the story and what's happened up to this point. I won't be going into full details yet, but major spoiler warning. If you haven't played yet and want to avoid discussion of big plot points, now is the time to mute the video or skip ahead. And before some of you comment, yes, there are people who watch these videos that still want to avoid spoilers. People do like watching runs of games they haven't played. Anyway, spoilers. So back at the end of Act 1 when the party got the rock for Esquie that allows him to swim with people on his back, things were going really well until Andy Serkis showed back up. Reminder that he's the old dude who completely demolished the expedition when they originally made landfall. Well, he made an appearance and made a sword-sized hole in Gustav's chest, with Verso showing up just in time to save Maëlle from the same fate. Yeah, sorry, Daredevil died, but no time to go through Dabda, get over it. Verso reveals he's a member of the original expedition from 67 years ago, though he's been granted immortality by the Paintress. Turns out though, immortality kinda sucks. Verso wants to kill the Paintress so he doesn't have to live anymore. With interests aligned, he joined the party, having revealed that Andy Serkis was also part of that initial expedition, was also granted immortality by the Paintress, and is protecting the Paintress from the party because he wants to keep living forever. Verso did bury the lead a little bit, with it being revealed a bit later that Andy Serkis is actually Verso's dad. Surely that's the only lead he buried though, right? But yeah, Maëlle naturally really wants to kill Andy Serkis for what he did to Gustav. Since the Paintress made him immortal though, the Paintress has got to come down before Gollum can meet his end. Added motivation for taking down the Paintress. So yeah, the party's grieving not just Gustave, but everyone they've lost over the years due to living in this fucked up world, and they've struck up an alliance with a dodgy, albeit helpful centenarian. So in about 23 seconds, Pete is going to stray to the right side of the marathon route to grab one of the last Pictos he'll get this run, Weakness Gain. It doesn't have the most helpful Lumina, +1 AP on hitting an enemy's weak spot, but it does provide 162 speed and a 17% crit rate bonus, which are both pretty handy. Pete's starting to get pretty far in the game, so the Pictos he acquires will generally be better stat-wise. This one will be going on Lune when he enters the next boss fight. It's good for the stats it gives, particularly the crit rate. Quick aside, Pete takes a super short detour after these grapples to grab a Resplendent Chroma Catalyst, an upgrade material for weapons. He's gotten a handful of materials like these from battles through the run, like he got a singular Resplendent from the Joy Mask, but this is the only one he actually needs to pick up in the run. Anyway, there's still a bit more running here, around 90 seconds or so. The Clair Obscur speedrunning community isn't kidding when they call this the Monolith Marathon. Pete's been skipping all the cutscenes so far in the run, which means we never got to see the camp cutscene where Ciel tells Lune that tomorrow will still come. It's a bit of a bummer we don't get to see that in the run, but that doesn't mean that I still can't take the time to say that I hope you're all doing well, and if you're not, then please remember, as always, that no feeling is final. You're in no way defined by how you're feeling. Your feelings are a reflection of where you are rather than who you are, and even if it's really tough right now, even if every day is difficult, things will get better little by little, even if you don't notice it day to day. There will come a day where it'll hit you just how much progress you've made while simply trying to survive. You'll notice you've gone hours without thinking about those things rather than minutes. It's the small steps like those you don't realize you're taking that you should recognize and celebrate, because every mental health win is an important one. The sun is still going to rise tomorrow, no matter what's going on. That cannot be taken away from you. You will be here, stronger than the day before, and the fact you're here is what's most important. So again, please remember, as always, no feeling is final and there is a tomorrow. Back to the run, we're finally at the finish line of the Monolith Marathon, a train that will ride to Monolith Lumière. LOL, JK, this is one of those fucked up marathons where they prank you with another half marathon you have to do after. Classic. Pete's currently headed to the next boss fight, the second fight against Renoir, Andy Serkis. The first real fight against Andy Serkis was skipped with Old Lumiere Skip. So I alluded to this earlier when mentioning Hidden Arena, but when I was about halfway through writing the script, a speedrunner named BDud5 found Andy Serkis 2 skip. Skipping this fight led to router and speedrunner Zero Leet to re-examine the route and find a more efficient XP route in fighting the Joy Mask rather than go to Hidden Arena. To do Andy Serkis 2 skip, you lure an enemy right next to the cutscene trigger for the fight, then jump into the enemy to trigger combat, but you space and angle your jump so that you hit the cutscene trigger right after. This puts you in combat with the regular ol' enemy, but the game thinks you're fighting Andy Serkis, complete with his boss music and everything. Since it's a normal combat though, you can just flee, which you normally can't do against Andy Serkis. The game considers fleeing as having completed the Andy Serkis fight, saving somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds. The same thing can be done on the Andy Serkis 3 fight, Andy Serkis 3 skip. Ultimately though, the Clair Obscur speedrunning community voted to disallow the Andy Serkis skips from the restricted category. The category itself is inherently arbitrary. It's a creation of the community for the sole reason of excluding a glitch they felt changed the run too much. The majority sentiment in the community was that the restricted category is more interesting and overall improved without the Andy Serkis skips. They're still allowed in unrestricted runs, of course. Despite the fight still being in the route, Zero's optimized Joy Mask route still ended up being faster and saving at least 2 minutes. So when he enters the Andy Serkis 2 fight here, Pete cutscene menus to equip weakness gain on Lune, Unind re-equips inverted affinity on Verso so he gets to 2 HP again, and puts first strike back on Maëlle. To open the fight, Pete uses last chance on Maëlle to lower her to 1 HP, but max her AP and enter Virtuose stance. then immolates as Lune to set Andy Serkis ablaze and gain a fire stain, then uses an energy tint on Lune to start building her AP, needing to get her to at least 7 by her 3rd turn. On Andy's turn, Pete counters to maximize damage. On Lune's 2nd turn, Pete uses Ice Lance to generate an ice and a light stain, so he now has the stains to really strengthen Lightning Dance. Because Andy hasn't done any attacks the full party could counter, Pete's damage is a little low, so he unloads a few shots as Mael to chip damage, then uses Rain of Fire to apply a bunch more burn. He then uses Leadership as Verso to get Lune over 7 AP. After parrying Andy's attacks, Pete will consume the Fire, Ice, and Wildcard Light Stain for a greatly increased damage Lightning Dance to finish the fight. Since Andy goes from above 50% health to nothing in one character's turn, the 2nd phase of the fight is entirely skipped. Afterwards, he just has to run through the portal up ahead to start making his way to the summit of the Monolith to confront the real Paintress face to face.
We're outside.
She's there. I can feel her.
We need to be as prepared as possible. Once we go up.
Once Pete gets to the summit of the Monolith, he'll do a cutscene menu as he leaps into the trigger for the fight. He'll use that menu to equip the Dead Energy 2 Lumina on Lune because of the unlisted bonus damage, and Inverted Affinity on Mael so she deals 50% increased damage. Pete opens the fight with offensive switch on Mael to apply defenseless and switch to offensive stance for more damage, then immolates as Lune to get burn going, and as Verso he'll use an energy tint on Lune. This is why Pete picked up the energy tint shard back in Stonewave Cliffs, so he could use one in Andy Serkis 2 and still have one to use here. Each of Paintress's turns are scripted, with Pete dodging the meteors she always uses on her first turn. If countered, he'd potentially kill Phase 1 too early, resulting in Paintress getting an extra turn in Phase 2, which loses a lot of time. He does parry her 2nd attack though. Pete opens the next turn with Ice Lance to generate the stains required for a stronger Lightning Dance, then uses Rain of Fire on Mael to increase the burn and get multiple max damage hits, then uses Defiant Strike as Verso for an additional max damage multi-hit attack, applying Mark for increased damage on the next hit, and self-damaging from 2 to 1 HP to proc SOS power. He parries the move the Paintress always throws out, with the party dealing additional damage thanks to Marked. It's now time for Pete to put on his raving shoes, using Lightning Dance as Lune to land 6 max damage hits, each critting and proccing an additional max damage hit. This greatly lowers the Paintress's health, where after parrying this attack here, he'll use Rain of Fire on Mael, dealing enough damage to initiate the next phase of this fight. Had he parried her first attack earlier, he'd likely kill her when parrying here, which is what would cause that extra attack in Phase 2. This phase starts with the Paintress summoning her weapon from her plate, but not attacking yet. Oh, I mean pallet. She summons her weapon from her pallet. Pete opens this phase himself with a Defiant Strike from Verso, really just trying to deal as much damage as he can with this action while also applying Mark again. The Paintress then summons her giant bush that she'll attack the party with. Oh, sorry, reading's really hard today. She summons her giant brush to attack the party with Pete parrying to keep up the pressure with damage. On his next turn, only Lune goes, with Pete using Wildfire for the first actual time this run, not just self-nuking Lune this time. This generates both a fire and a light stain, so between the fire stain and 2 light stains, Lune has enough for another increased damage Lightning Dance. That has to wait though, with Pete raining some more fire on the Paintress to maximize Mael's max damage hits. Then parrying the attack where the Paintress literally tears a hole into reality and fires Mystery Electric Tar at the party. I mentioned earlier that this new reroute has a much faster Paintress strat. Runners used to do this fight with one character, utilizing Pictos from the hidden arena that boosts solo fighters. The limiting step in doing this before was getting Lumière to perform max damage 100% crit dances without those hidden arena Pictos. Back to Verso, he's at S rank so he deals a ton of damage, with Pete using Berserk Slash to get in 3 more max damage hits. He can then finish off phase 2 with 1 more lightning dance from Lumière. This brings us to phase 3, where Paintress is looking a little gassed, and 1 turn from Verso will wrap things up. After a quick skip from Lumière and a Berserk Slash from Verso, the longest fight in the run is finished.
A storm is coming.
This wraps up Act 2, leading to 6 cutscenes for Pete to skip, resulting in an interlude named Epilogue. Interlude named Epilogue, good band name. This section is pretty straightforward and short. It's just running through the manor and talking to a lady. That brings you into Act 3. How about another spoiler section to explain what's really going on? Last chance to mute or skip before spoilers for the full plot of this game. So, after we beat Andy Serkis, the curator, the NPC from camp who upgrades weapons, showed up and helped us Thanos Andy. Thanos Andy, another good band name? Probably not. At the Monolith Summit, we killed the Paintress and the number she painted disappeared too. This led to everyone in Lumière getting Thanos'd other than Verso. So what's really going on? Well, Lumière's world is actually inside what's more or less a living canvas, painted by Verso of the Desandra family. That's in the real world. They're pretty much like magic painters. Real world Verso died in a fire, and long story short, his mom entered this canvas of his to grieve and refuses to leave. Her name's Aline, she's the Paintress. Verso's dad, IRL Andy Serkis, ended up entering the canvas, intent on destroying it to bring Aline back to their family. The curator, it turns out, is actually IRL Andy Serkis. That's what the gommage is. IRL Andy Serkis / the curator wanting to destroy the canvas, but Aline / the Paintress using her abilities to slow the process. There's a lot more details to this that aren't worth going into, like Mael's actually Verso's sister, except her name was originally Alicia. She's also grieving Verso's death, and Alicia entered the canvas to interrupt the stalemate between her parents, but was born as baby Mael with no memories. But with Mael getting Thanos'd, she's now been born again as adult Mael with memories of both her life as Mael and her life as a Paintress in the real world. Actually, that's all pretty important. I'm glad I mentioned it. Anyway, we're setting off to revive the party, fight IRL Andy Serkis in the canvas, and then decide the fate of the canvas once and for all. So to start Act 3, Pete was given the Painted Power Picto, which removes the 9,999 damage cap. He'll do a cutscene menu here to equip it, then select Immaculate and hover over Mael's second slot. That way after skipping the cutscene, Lumière will be back in the party and he'll be allowed to mash to swap Immaculate from Lumière to Mael. Skipping the cutscene brings him straight to camp, where after the game autosaves, he loads the save outside Flying Waters and does a save warp by again debug loading once the particles on the loading screen stop moving, then interacting with the portal in the brief window. Normally you're supposed to talk to all 5 party members at camp before sleeping, but we have a few absentees, which actually softlocks the game. Even though there's now a billion Maels and Lumières, and they could provide plenty dialogue. Save warping bypasses this softlock though, with Pete doing one to skip the missing dialogue and bring the freshly united party to the world map, though Pete removes then re-adds Mael while jumping into the portal, needing her to go after Verso in first strike ordering. In the world map, he immediately takes to the sky with Esquie, because yeah, they fly now. It's something you unlock at the start of Act 3. Rather than take his time to explore the world map, backtrack a bit or check out new areas, Pete flies straight to Lumière, the final area of the game as evidenced by how hard the score goes. Right when loading in, he also removes Lumière from the party so a future flee is quicker. At the first flag here, he levels up Mael's might as much as possible to purely scale damage, learns Mael's skill Stendhal, and he'll upgrade Mael's weapon, Barrier Breaker, as much as he can with all the resources he's earned throughout the run from fighting enemies. Before he can begin the final approach, he fights a lone aberration that's in this area. He picks this fight for the Picto that's dropped. It's a pretty simple fight, using leadership as Verso to give Mael the AP to use Stendhal. Stendhal is her single strongest attack, which one-shots the aberration. This fight drops Shortcut, which has the Lumina of immediately playing again when your health drops below 30%. This pairs really nicely with Mael's Last Chance skill, which drops her to 1 HP, but both fully fills her AP and switches her to Virtuose stance. It's a great opener. Twice you'll see Pete use Shortcut to start a fight. This begins our next marathon, though it's not quite as bad as the Monolith Marathon. It isn't quite great though, so this is a pretty new game to be covering on my channel. I don't typically cover games this new. I like to let the dust settle on a route a little before covering it, but as I'll talk about in a moment, this run was chosen to be covered by my patrons and I'm glad it was. It's a super cool run and I've not had the chance to cover a more traditional turn-based RPG like this before. Covering a run this new did mean that Pete and I had to contend with that pretty sizable reroute I discussed a little bit ago, and believe it or not, less than 2 weeks before this video released, there was another reroute. Runners now leave Forgotten Battlefield after unlocking gradient parries and do a skip for the area similar to Old Lumiere Skip, skipping Inverted Affinity and the launch. The route's largely the same both before Act 2 and after Forgotten Battlefield Skip, with some minor adjustments made to builds and a bit more RNG, like requiring a crit on a headshot during the Joy Mask fight, which only has a 46% chance. This newer reroute was developed by Flaze who also holds the unrestricted world record, with the reroute estimated to save a little over a minute. Around this corner is a great example of why Pete jumps so much, with the collision grabbing Lune's ankles, stopping her in her tracks. Getting snagged there means Pete has to take a wider berth around this big angry enemy so it doesn't get him. As he continues to run, I want to give a huge thank you to the people who not only make videos like these possible, but as I mentioned a moment ago, specifically submitted and voted for this run to be covered, my patrons. Every other video on my channel is decided by them, and you can be a part of that decision making by going to patreon.com/tomatoanus and joining at any tier. In fact, if you're watching this video within a week of release, you can actually take part in this right now. There's a suggestion thread that will remain open for the next week, with patrons able to comment speedruns they're interested in, with some stipulations like it has to be under an hour long. Once that week has passed, I'll post a poll with everyone's suggestions so you can go vote for what you'd like to see me cover. If you're watching this in like 2028, what up? Hope the future is better than today, and sorry you missed this specific poll, but this is an ongoing thing I like to do, and as long as I'm still making videos then, I'm sure I'm still running these suggestions and votes for every other video on Patreon. Supporting at any tier also gets your name in these credits like these beautiful folks you see before you, and gets you access to videos early. If you decide to support at a higher tier though, you get a little extra in return, like my monthly retrospective series where I watch an old video of mine and provide commentary on what I think the video does and doesn't do well, taking notes to try and make better videos today. Overall, supporting the channel monetarily is entirely unnecessary. Seriously, no pressure. But the fact that it's unnecessary is what makes those of you who do support one of a kind. So truly, thank you for the support. So the first of the two final fights is Andy Circus 3, which, as mentioned earlier, has a skip to it. It's exactly the same as the previous Andy Circus skip, luring an enemy to the trigger for the fight, leaping at the enemy to start combat, and hitting the cutscene trigger right after. We don't have any of those Andy Circus skips in this run though. We're fighting that mofo for giving us Animal Farm 2025. Real talk, my 7-year-old niece and 5-year-old nephew chose to walk out of that movie. Pete's on the final stretch to the boss fight, but there's actually a mini-boss blocking your way right beforehand. Its name is Creation, but Pete's actually going to do Creation Skip, the most precise skip in the run. As soon as he loads in, he holds tab, which flees him from battle. That's why he removed Lune from the party at the start of Old Lumiere, to flee faster. With Creation turned into a living statue, he can then head to the penultimate fight, doing a cutscene menu in the process. In this one, he'll swap Verso out for Lune, put the shortcut Picto on Mael, then the SOS power Lumina on her. This is because he'll open the fight with Last Chance, lowering her health to 1 but swapping her to Virtuose stance. This triggers Shortcut, letting her go again immediately since her health is below 30%, and thanks to the SOS power Lumina, she also has powerful auto applied for dropping below 50%. Phase 1 of this fight is super simple, consisting of solely the aforementioned combo, Last Chance to proc Shortcut and take another turn, now in Virtuose stance and with max AP. Pete then uses Stental, dealing about 360,000 damage more than what was needed. The transition from Phase 1 to 2 lasts a while, with Andy Serkis getting salty and saying he's gonna go home because Mael and Lune aren't being nice to him. Fun fact, you can actually still dodge while a lot of this is playing out.
Selfish, Aline!
To start Phase 2, Pete uses Ice Lance to apply slow to Andy, making it so that he only gets 1 turn now instead of 2 in a row. When Andy attacks here, Pete dodges the final swing so that the party doesn't parry since he doesn't need the damage from a counterattack and sitting through it would only lose time. Both Mael and Lune have turns now, with him using Last Stand to again enter Virtuose stance, though since his health doesn't change at all, Shortcut doesn't proc. He then skips Lune's turn, just wanting to get to Mael's next turn as soon as possible so he can finish the fight. Wait, this isn't Halo 3. Even if this Stental doesn't crit, it'll still deal 432,000 damage, more than enough to finish the fight. No, go away, it's not your time on this channel yet.
Put aside the cannons. It's killing you both.
Not this time!
After the fight, Pete uses a Chroma Elixir to fully heal Mael and then makes his way to the final cutscene of the run. In this moment, you pick whether you want to fight as Verso or Mael for the fate of the canvas. Pete's been beefing up Mael all Act 3, and she also has the best solo combo, using Last Chance to immediately enter Virtuose stance and fill her AP and trigger Shortcut to go again so that Pete can use Rain of Fire to kill Verso. If he doesn't crit at all with the attack, that's okay because the burn will kill.
Flames. Rain.
So if you made it to the end of the run, thank you so much on behalf of both myself and Pete, and of course a huge thank you to Pete for helping make this video. This video was honestly a real challenge with all the reroutes that happened during production, but Pete made the experience truly incredible and was so helpful the whole way through. He kept me in the loop on all rerouting updates, re-recorded the run for the video with the updated route, and did a lot of script checking to make sure I made all the adjustments correctly. Plus, his streams are super chill and cozy, and I can't recommend enough you check out his channel. He actually originally learned this speedrun because of someone in his stream community redeeming the 690,420 point channel reward for Learn a Speedrun, with the viewer picking this game. Pete loves to speedrun this game and others too. He enjoys diving into all sorts of speedruns, but especially RPGs like this one. He's always ready to answer questions about speed tech or have a chat, really just a fun time to hang out, so again, please check him out. And last but not least, as always, please check out the Tomato Anus Discord server. It's a really chill place where I'm trying to be more active as I begin an indefinite break from streaming myself to focus more on this channel and my Discord community. So come join us, get occasional updates on my Monstera. Anyway, that's all for this video. This was a single segment, any % restricted speedrun of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I've been Tomato Anus, and I hope you have an above average day.